Bhagwad Gita. It is a religious text of the Hindus, and it happens to be part of an epic called as the Mahabharata. And it is, there's different claims how old it is, probably 5,000 years old. But the Mahabharata, the epic Mahabharata, it was written by a sage called as Vyasa. And Vyasa is like a superhuman, a university, it's more the sheer quantum of work that is associated with Vyasa is so much. It's possible that it is a collection of people who did this work, or it's more like a university. Nevertheless, whatever it is, this work, the Mahabharata, is humongous. It is about 100,000 verses. The exact number is 84,000 and odd something, but roughly. So of these 100,000 verses, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, is roughly 1,000, just to have a decimal kind of ratio in mind, 100,000 verses to 1,000 verses. In reality, it is probably 84,000 and odd verses, and the Bhagavad Gita is about 700 verses. So if you take into account the fraction it is of the Mahabharata, it is the immense popularity that this text has is because of the content that it is made up of. And why is it so important is obviously what we are going to study. Now, just as a point of reference, it is said that the epic Mahabharata is actually more than the epics written by Homer. Iliad and Odysseus put together, this work is said to be more than that. So just to give the listeners an idea of the magnitude of this work, and we are going to get into a lot of the Mahabharata. The thing is that most of the times when the Bhagavad Gita is being discussed, Mahabharata is touched upon here and there, but not delved that much deep. But in this talk or in this study that we'll be going into, we are going to touch upon several details of the Mahabharata, because they are necessary for the kind of study that we are going to get into. What the Bhagavad Gita is a dialogue between a warrior prince, if you will, called Arjuna, and kind of incarnation of God, who is Krishna. Krishna is the one in blue there with the halo. And this dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna is captured in the Bhagavad Gita. And this dialogue is in the form of verses. And we will get into how this has been accounted and how we have been able to, we are able to read it, or it has come to us. So what makes the Bhagavad Gita such an interesting document, such an interesting work in the Hindu religion? So I will give some parallels. They are not an exactly apples to oranges, but to give some idea. So just like when we say Christianity, the Bible comes to mind. Or if we say Islam, the Quran comes to mind. Similarly, when we say Hinduism, for many people, Bhagwad Gita comes to mind. Although, like I said, that this is not a good parallel, because the Bhagavad Gita is not, that Bible and Quran are kind of the core works of that religion. Bhagavad Gita is based on some of the core works. Now, the Bible, if you put the Old and New Testament together, there are about 30,000 verses in that. In the Quran, there are about 6,000 verses. So comparatively, Bhagwad Gita is much smaller, but it is kind of similar in terms of it being used as a parallel identity, but it's smaller and it is based on other works. And what are those other works that actually form the foundation of the Hindu religion? Those or that work is called as the Vedas. So there are four Vedas in the Hindu religious ecosystem, if you will. The Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharva Veda. We will not get into the details of this. We'll get into details of some of it. But I will explain what constitute the Vedas and why we are focusing on a certain part of the Vedas and why we are leaving out some other things. Now, what is constituted in the Vedas, or why the Vedas have such import, is they are considered to be revelations. So again, I do want to stick to the fact where we started out of being a rationalist. So a revelation is what is a revelation? Is an idea, a clarity that came to somebody, and then he chose to somehow articulate it in the form of a text. He told somebody, which came down generations and so on and so forth. But that's what the Vedas are. They are texts that are based on revelations. Now, it's not like the entire Veda is revelation, but it is based on revelations. And then there are different ways in which it is developed, and we will touch upon some of it. There's no need to get into the entire details. So who are these people to whom these truths were revealed? They are called as Rishis. And some of you might have seen this picture somewhere, but just like we have Moses and Muhammad and other people in other religions, there are Rishis in the Hindu religious culture, if you will, where these Rishis are the people who were revealed truths, and they articulated it, communicated it in some way to their disciples, devotees, and it got captured somehow or the other. And we'll see a few ways in which it got captured. Now, we want to be careful when we use the word revelation, because for a rationalist, when we start throwing around such phrases, there is a danger that we might lose the main goal here. And when you start saying that, in a dream, God came and told me this and that, and immediately the audience, some part of the audience, will begin to question it. So that is not what we are talking about here. Revelation is a sudden clarity of some concept. So in that sense, I want to be very clear that we in the scientific world know such a Rishis, several Rishis, and one such parallel that if I want to draw is Newton. Newton is a Rishi. And what was his revelation? What did he do? He was thinking. Same way that the Rishis were thinkers. They were trying to get at the truth of some things. And they thought and they thought, and there was a time for some of them it didn't occur, some of them it did. In a flash, they knew this is how things are working. That is exactly what happened with Newton. Whether really an apple fell from a tree, who knows? Maybe it did. And whether it was at that moment that it came to Newton, there is this force that is pulling this apple down. There is a very good chance that it could have happened, this apple incident could have happened, but he must have been thinking about it for a long time. He must have been like possessed by what is this happening and all that. And this was just the tip of the iceberg. By the time the apple fell, his thinking process would have come to that level of maturity that he was able to connect the dots. And that is a revelation. When Archimedes jumped out of his bathtub, it was a revelation. So those are the revelations that we are talking about. Nothing fantastic and funny going on here. So the Rishis, they were trying to figure out certain things, and some of them figured it out. And then Newton captured it in a mathematical language. Force is equal to mass into acceleration, and so on and so forth. We know the Newton's laws. Every action has equal and opposite reaction, and so on and so forth. So these Rishis, when they were revealed, when they came to know these truths, how did they capture? So they captured it in several ways, but the one of the product in which they were captured was the Vedas. And in the Vedas, these spiritual laws have been kind of interspersed, they're spread over the Vedic documents. But in general, there are 4 parts that make up the Vedas. There is the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, the Aryanyakas, and the Upanishads. And we absolutely do not have to go into the details of all of this. What we do want to see, what we do want to do, or what we will do is touch upon some of the major things that are there in the last part, the Upanishads. The Upanishads are the cream, if you will, of the Vedas. And they are also a huge in number. We will touch upon some of them. And why they are so important is, we will see later on that in the Bhagwad Gita, some of these Upanishads have been quoted verbatim. These revelations that the Rishis had, you will see them most crisply articulated in the Upanishads. They are present in some form in the Samhitas, the Brahmana, Aranyakas. They are there. It's not that they're lost, but you have to wade through a lot of jargon before you kind of see those gems. In the Upanishads, also you have to do that, but they are still pretty crisp. So the Vedas are the core texts in which the Upanishads form the crowning glory, if you will, of the Vedas. And the Bhagwad Gita is sitting on top of this and explaining some of the potentially apparent conflicting things that might occur there. So we are going to see that. So how did these revelations, how were they captured, and how did they come to be in the Vedas? So the language that is being used to capture this information, to communicate this revelation by the Rishis, is called as Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is a very advanced and developed language, and it has got several grammatical rules. There are very interesting things about the Sanskrit language. If you were to just study Sanskrit, it would take you a lifetime. All these texts are written in Sanskrit. The way certain words are used in Sanskrit, the way they are joined, the umpteenth number of grammatical rules that are there, how you're writing in prose and how you write in poetry. One of the things that have been said is the Vedas, they are said to be the word of God. But like I said, these are the revelations. No reason for us to just jump over the board and just throw the baby with the bathwater. Okay, revelation, I'm not going to see this. You don't have to do that. Keep an open mind, read it. Just because somebody has said that, it doesn't mean that it is talking something fantastic. So the this this intelligence, this knowledge that the Rishis got were said in Sanskrit. And at the time that this knowledge was precipitated, there wasn't any means of persistence of knowledge. That this you writing and reading, for that matter, were kind of not known. Where do you write this? So they came up with a very novel way uh, to preserve this knowledge, and that was through memorization. So across generations, till today, there are schools where sections of these Vedas, there were families who kind of took ownership that this slice of the Vedas, we will by heart this, and it went down generations. There were people who could by heart more than one section, and that is how we are lucky today that they did this. And later on, obviously, it got captured in black and white in text. So we don't really need to do it, at least for the sake of preserving it. You do it for other reasons because you want to keep it at the back of your mind and some such sort. But the actual Vedic verses, the mantras, they were transmitted from generation to generation by having it memorized. They would get up at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning and start reciting this for hours together every day. And there is different systems had been set up how one should memorize this and all that. We are not going to get into all that. What we do want to know is, what is the nature of the way in which this knowledge is captured? Now you want to understand that what is being discussed here is not that tangible, in the sense that Newton discovered gravity and he said force is equal to mass into acceleration. And you take a rock and you throw it, and you take a rock that is heavier and you throw it, and you can see the differences, that it took more effort to lift one. The impact of the bigger one was more than the smaller one. So there's some tangibility there. But here, that tangibility is not that clear. So how would you do when you cannot express, for example, electrodynamic or magnetic fields, you cannot see it. So you resort to indirect means. And one of the ways in which this Vedic lore has been transmitted is through the use of poetry. There is a lot of poetry in the entire Upanishads and the Bhagwad Gita and other epics. Now, Bhagwad Gita is the word Bhagwad Gita. Bhagwat is God and Gita is poem or song. Song of the Lord is what you could translate it to. So it is a poetry. So it has got verses, and there is some pretty intense grammar. So the verses are in something called as Anushtup Chanda. Most of them are. And so they have to be in a certain order. And that's what throws up the Sanskrit a bit, the verbs and the nouns and things. They are all over the place, and you got to be a little bit focused how the sentence has been broken up to understand what it is. But apart from the grammar part of it, once you know what is there, the poetry part of it basically just opens the door completely open. If you are reading Wordsworth's Daffodils, 10,000 saw I at a glance. He was watching the 10,000 daffodils. How you interpret that is going to depend on the kind of person you are, the kind of influence your upbringing has on you, the kind of habits you have developed till the age that you are at now, the experience that you have had so far, all that funnel, all that channel into your effort at understanding what a certain verse in a certain poem means. And it's not going to be easy for you to look at it from somebody else's perspective. You have your own perspective, and you got to take an effort to understand somebody else's perspective. So there are a bunch of things happening here that you might be convinced the way you understand a certain prose or certain sentence in the poetry, like as terrible as a tiger. Now, are you going to think of this person as a tiger himself? Has he got the muscles of a tiger? Has he got canines that are long? Are people afraid of him? Does he live a secluded life? It's just open to interpretation. Therefore, the Bhagwad Gita, being poetry, can be interpreted in a number of ways. And a number of personalities that are there, they can look at it in that different number of ways. We will be looking at it in a certain way. And there is no rule that you got to agree with this perspective, but it will shed light on this is the way in which you can look at it. Now, it is like a game of chess, right? So you have a game of chess in which you have been told that a pawn can go straight one home, and then a bishop can go sideways, or a rook can go this way, and the queen can go this way, and the king. You know the rules of the game. And once you know the rules of the game, no two players play it the same way. You play it the way you understand, and I will play it the way I understand. The rules are the same, but our understanding, the pleasure that one takes from that is also different. You might lose a game and still have a lot of pleasure out of that. So the Bhagavad Gita has to be taken in the right light. Now, what is the right light? There is no right and wrong. The right light, there are some fundamental rules, but other than that, the right light would be that which makes most sense to you. You don't have to go overboard. There might be certain gray areas. There will be certain gray areas, but you have to be very reasonable about them. And you can be, based on the experiences that you have accumulated over the years, you can be reasonable about what it is that you take away from a certain flavor of text that you see in the Bhagavad Gita. So having said that, I want to bring this notion to you that in order to understand some kind of integration, you need to have studied calculus first. What I'm trying to say here is that for us to understand the Bhagavad Gita, we have to put the context right. And there are several contexts here. There is the chronological context. There is a spiritual context. There is an intellectual context. There are several other spatial contexts that are there. So where does the Bhagavad Gita sit in the Mahabharata? Who are the different actors? Why are they talking about this? So we are going to take a look at all these things before we embark on the actual journey of the Bhagavad Gita. And that is why it is going to be a while before we start with the actual study of this text. We will be looking at some parts of the Upanishads. We will be looking at some parts of the Mahabharata in particular detail. There are certain aspects of the Mahabharata that we would want to keep at the back of our mind for most of the times some characters in the Mahabharata. And when I go over this, I will be telling you that this is an important character that we will keep in mind. There are literally hundreds of characters in the Mahabharata. So we are going to see which characters are going to be necessary for us to keep in our mind when we study this text. So next time when we meet, I will be going over some of the works of the initial works of the Mahabharata, some history about that. It might take us a little bit of time, maybe, I don't know, 2-3 sessions before we actually start with the Mahabharata. There is a ton of metaphors. We have to decipher them one by one, at least the major ones, before we actually start the study of the Bhagwad Gita. Thanks for listening to this, and talk to you in the next session. Thanks. Bye.